Thank you, and thank you all for being here. I don't like following students, because there's nothing I can say right now that's going to sound better. So you're going to have to bear with me. I'm at a total disadvantage. But that said, I am Melinda Karp. I'm a senior research associate at the Community College Research Center at Teachers College. For those of you who aren't familiar with our work, we are a research organization. We are committed to applying rigorous research that's useful, which is not always easy. We have a wealth of information on our website. So we're an interdisciplinary organization, so we have economists, sociologists, psychologists, and we do quantitative and qualitative research. A lot of what we put out is intended to be immediately useful for those of you who actually work in a community college. So I'd encourage you to take a look at our website, because we write on everything from developmental education reform to student services to accountability. We're finishing up a grant cycle right now, and over the next 4 to 5 months are going to be having a slew of practitioner-oriented papers coming out. So I will make sure that our website is accessible to all of you, and hopefully you will visit it. I do want to preface the fact that we view ourselves as critical friends. What we do and what we believe is that fundamentally the mission of the community college is essential for higher education. And that there's nothing more important than ensuring access to college for all students in this country, and that community colleges are a key route to doing that. But as researchers committed to rigor, sometimes we have to be the bearers of bad news. So I kind of hate that part of it, where sometimes I come out and tell you all that your hard work isn't moving the needle the way we'd like. But I say it with the utmost respect and with the belief that research should be used to improve practice, not just to only make us feel good all of the time. What I want to talk to you today about is supporting students and success. And I want to talk about mainly what the president already stole my thunder, ways the entire institution needs to be engaged in doing that, how it's not just about classrooms or support services, but what the research says about what works and what doesn't work in moving students towards success. To start, I want to talk about what I mean by student success in the community college, because it's changed. When we were founded in 1996, and I joined the center not long after, community college success was still really about access. It was getting students in the front door. Funding was done based on who showed up on the 4th or 5th day of class. All that mattered was that students had access to college. And what happened once we enrolled them kind of wasn't the focus. Over the past probably 5 to 7 years or so, that conversation has changed. And at least for me and my colleagues, and I think if you listen to the national dialogue around higher education, for most people in this country, access is no longer enough. It doesn't matter that we get you in the front door if you get 6 credits and a boatload of loans and nothing else. The issue is, how do we get you through to whatever that goal of yours might be? Usually that's a certificate or a credential or a transfer that leads to a bachelor's degree, not just a number of bachelor's degree credits going nowhere. The issue is really about success as earning something. And so that's a shift in the conversation, and we hear it when we hear the Gates Foundation talking about college success. We hear it in the presidential campaign. We hear it a lot, that it's not about opening our doors if those doors don't go anywhere. So this isn't a conversation being had just here at Bergen County College or even in New Jersey. This is a national conversation. What do? We know when we look nationally that student success, if you define it around completion, is pretty abysmal. If you look at the national statistics, of the full-time, first-time freshmen who enter a 2-year college, 40% of them don't show up the next year. The number is even lower when we're talking about our part-time students. Fewer than half of new community college students earn an associate's degree within 3 years or a bachelor's degree within 6. Now, I am the first to acknowledge that some of that is because 3 years is actually a pretty short time if you start in developmental coursework and you only go part-time. But the evidence, as we'll talk about in a second, is that time is of the enemy. The longer it takes, the less likely a student is to complete something. And the reality is that around this country, half or less of our students are earning something in 150% time, more than what they're supposed to do. They're not coming out with a credential. And here's the rub. It's not just about academic preparation. Some colleagues of mine did work in Virginia, and I'm going to pick on them only because they were nice enough to share the data, which they might now never do. But we took a look at all of the students who entered a community college in Virginia, in anywhere in the entire state, in 1 year. And we took a look at the students who did not need developmental coursework. So these were the students who were deemed college ready, who were allowed to take college credit courses from the get-go. In that cohort of students, academically prepared students, barely over a third of them earned a credential within 4 years. And Virginia's not unique. They just happen to be big and have good data. It's not that they're spectacularly bad. My point is that if you define success as finishing something, a certificate, a degree, a transfer, community colleges are not leading to success for large numbers of students, and that's true for our part-time students, our full-time students, our developmental students, and our college-ready students. The question becomes, what do we do about that? I think it's been pretty well articulated at this point that something needs to be changed. So my job here today is to talk to you about what that might be. What do we know from the rigorous research that you can grab onto and hold onto and say, okay, let's start doing something different? Because clearly what community colleges nationally are doing isn't working despite the best intentions. And I say that because I'm a qualitative researcher. I go out and I talk to people at colleges. It's not like I'm crunching numbers and criticizing. I know the passion that goes into the work that happens in these institutions, and it kills me to tell you these statistics. So the question becomes, what can I tell you that's useful and positive? And I want to talk to you today mainly about success defined as supporting students, I'll call it non-academically. You know, it's not about teaching calculus or teaching the grammar of a sentence. It's about all the other stuff that goes into being a successful student. And there's a lot of research out there around what does and doesn't work in terms of supporting students from the day they enter that open door until the day they hopefully leave with some sort of a credential. Now, I have to be honest with you. We know a lot more about what doesn't work than what does. When you take a look at what's happening and you apply really rigorous methods, and by that I'm talking about, big data sets, lots of statistical stuff that controls student characteristics, or really large interview qualitative studies. When you take a look at the rigorous work, a lot of what we know is what doesn't work. But that doesn't mean that there aren't really important and good lessons around what can be changed down the line. So just because something doesn't work doesn't mean we can't learn how to improve practice from it. Basically, what comes out of the literature is that there are 3 intersecting parts of student success. You can think of them almost as legs of a stool, right? So you need all 3 of them to sit on, otherwise the stool falls down. And if you've got one really strong leg, that's fantastic, but probably not going to make a great seat. You need all 3 areas of support for students in order to move them through to graduation or transfer. And I want to talk about the research in all 3 areas, with the caveat that really you need to do all of them together. We'll talk about them separately. The 3 areas are what happens in the classroom, talking about pedagogy and interaction, what I call non-academic supports. It's all that other stuff, advising, counseling, disability studies, the library, all of that stuff that's not overtly in a discipline, but it's still academic. It's supporting student success. And then the 3rd leg of the stool is the broader structure of the college, how the college is actually set up to function. It has a really big impact on the day-to-day lives and success of students. So I want to talk about these things one by one, tell you a little bit about what the research says, and hopefully draw some lessons that you can use in each of these areas. So those of you who are instructors, pay close attention to the instructor one, but don't ignore the other 2 because they all intersect. Let's start with the classroom, okay? The first thing we know is when we go out into the classroom, for the most part, and remember I'm a researcher, I kind of talk in generalities, and someone's going to stand up and wave their arms and say, but I don't do it this way, and I know you don't, but most people do. We use traditional pedagogy in the college classroom, and this is true in K-12 too. Despite all of the talk about how lecture and chalk and talk and drill and kill don't work, although I'm doing it right now, it doesn't work for students. And it particularly doesn't work for students who've had a bad experience in high school previously. Why are we doing more of the same? And yet, if you go out to the college classroom, most classrooms tend to rely on pretty traditional types of pedagogy. Maybe a discussion thrown in here and there, but it's lecture. It's learning facts. Developmental classrooms actually tend to be pretty bad in this regard. So we just teach students how to get the right answer, get them to pass that test rather than to think about it. And if you think about that, that didn't work in high school. Why is it going to work now? We know that there are pedagogies that are more effective for all students, for all learners. The problem is that they're really, really hard to implement. They take cultural change. They take reimagining what it looks like to be a college teacher. We all have this vision of college, that professor in tweed who's an expert in the discipline, who's going to impart their knowledge to young, inquisitive minds. And honestly, it's really hard as a professor to move away from that vision to something that looks and feels different. It requires professional development, which frankly, most colleges don't have the budget for or the time for, particularly to do in a sustained and useful way. So changing pedagogy is hard. We know that from the research, and we know that it's really important. But the other thing I want to point out to you about pedagogy is that not all pedagogical change is created equal. So just changing the way you teach for the sake of change, however well-intentioned, is not necessarily going to get you a better result. The evidence is pretty clear that some of the big pedagogical changes that we talk about may actually be detrimental to students in the community college. And I'm particularly referring to things like online and distance learning. We hear a lot now about either moving students to online courses because it's cheaper, it's easier, it's supposedly more accessible, or we hear a lot about modularization. It's particularly popular down south right now, where you're taking your developmental coursework and you're putting it in actionable chunks. So you don't have to take a whole developmental math course, you just take the part you don't know, which is a very appealing approach. And I will say that when it comes to modularization, the jury is out. It is way too new to know. But my colleagues at CCRC have taken a look at online learning, which is also supposed to be a new and wonderful way to teach. And when they look at the data, students, particularly disadvantaged students, lower achieving students, I think poor students, although don't quote me on that one, do worse in an online course than they would do in an equivalent face-to-face course. This is Shauna Smith-Jaggars, Jaggars. Her work is on our website. And it's really interesting. So just changing pedagogy isn't necessarily going to change student outcomes. You've got to pick the right ones. The research shows that there are two in particular that you might want to consider, but again, they're going to require some serious mind shifts. The first is contextualization, teaching coursework in context. So for example, rather than teaching students to read in course A and biology in course B, teach students to read via biology. Random assignment studies show that students actually learn to read better and the learning gains persist for longer if you teach in context. Washington State's been doing this with their adult basic education, their lowest level learners in certificate programs, and those students gain basic skills and gain a certificate at significantly higher rates than similar peers in non-contextualized coursework. The other type of pedagogy that the research has shown to be very promising is around teaching conceptually. So particularly for math, teaching students concepts in depth rather than facts and how to get the right answer has been shown to improve student learning outcomes. This is a very different way of teaching, and I don't mean to deny that, but I want to point out that there are new ways of running your classroom that can change the way students learn. The other piece about this stool, this leg of the stool in the classroom, that I really want to talk about because it's one of my own personal things, is the other interactions that students and teachers have. I'm not talking about content, I'm not talking about pedagogy, I'm talking about the classroom atmosphere. And I'm talking about the fact that instructors are from Mars and students are from Venus. You know that old book, or am I dating myself? See, the instructors know what I'm talking about, the students don't. When we look at the qualitative work on what happens in the community college classroom, it's very clear that the same type of thing is interpreted completely differently by instructors and students. So instructors say one thing, and they think they're being clear, and the students hear something else. The students behave one way for whatever motivation, and the instructors interpret it in a totally different way. People are having conversations like this, and then no wonder students get frustrated and don't come back, because frankly, it feels awful. So for example, Becky Cox, and for those of you who have not read Becky's book, it's called The College Fear Factor. It's a bright red cover. It's Harvard University Press, I believe, and it is a fantastic, qualitative, non-academic-y, like really easy read, that really explores and honors community college teaching. And what Becky found when she went into the community college classroom is that students come in with an intense amount of fear around failure. And this is particularly true for developmental education students, but not limited to them. The idea of being a college student is so tenuous for most students that anything that they do, asking for help, even completing an assignment, is very threatening. So what do students do? They just don't hand in their homework. Not because they don't care, not because they're lazy, not because they didn't know how, which is what the instructors think, but because you may still get a 0, but at least it's because you didn't screw up. But the instructors come down hard on them, not surprisingly, because they're not doing their work. And then they fail or they don't come back. This kind of miscommunication happens all the time in the classroom. And it has a real impact on how students feel about college and whether or not they want to stick around. The other piece of this is we, as academics, have pictures in our heads of what it means to be a college student. We have expectations. The problem is we don't tell them to our students. And then we come down hard on our students when they don't live up to them. So to tell a student who's never heard of a syllabus before, well, just follow your syllabus, and then expect them to remember to do that in November, you might want to be a little clearer about what that means. Instructors have pictures of what it means to appropriately ask for help, to appropriately email, how you sit in class, what you do in class. We take these things for granted because we all liked school. Like, that's why we're here. That's why we're in academia. But for students who don't have that basic family or cultural knowledge of what it means to be in higher education, it's foreign. Think about where most students learn about college, and particularly learn about community college. Here's where they can learn about it. Movies, which is, and again, I'll date myself here, but if you can think about all those college movies, which are four-year residential keg party movies. TV, so we've got the sitcom Community, which has nothing to do with how to actually be a successful college student, last I heard. The classic one, I asked someone when doing my dissertation, where did you learn about college? He told me the Gilmore Girls. This was a 16-year-old boy. I mean, he had nothing. He was going with the Gilmore Girls, and he was a 16-year-old boy. The New York Times does an insert on higher education 4 times a year. I don't remember ever them mentioning community colleges. Where do you learn how to be a community college student if your sister, your brother, your parents, the people in your neighborhood didn't teach you about it? And then students come into the classroom, and we have this picture in our head of what they're supposed to be doing, and they can't live up to it because we never told them what the rules were. So of course they get frustrated, and they aren't successful, and they don't come back. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. I think you get the point. So, we know that what happens in the classroom impacts how students feel about school, not just their learning, although obviously it impacts their learning, but also whether or not they want to stick around. We also know that what happens outside of the classroom matters. And here I'm talking again about those non-academic supports. All of those other things that you need to do to be successful. You need to have an advisor tell you what courses to take. You need to figure out how to go to the tutoring center if you need help, which also, by the way, means you need to realize you need help and know where to go to get the help. Perhaps there are supports, perhaps there are clubs. Here's the problem with all of these support services. This is my other soapbox, and so again, I hate saying this, and you can throw tomatoes at me in a second. They don't work. If you go to the website, there is a long list of supports. If I'm a student, how do I know which one to go to? How do I know which office I'm supposed to show up at? Who do I ask for help? And here's the other problem. I've got an academic advisor over here and a career counselor over there. Well, honestly, I want my academics to align to my career goals. But if I go to my academic counselor and tell my life story and my goals, they may give me one answer. But then I go to the career counselor and they tell me something else. And then I might go back to the academic advising office because, I need some more help, and I meet with a different advisor, and they give me a third answer. When we talk to students, it drives them bananas, and I don't blame them. Students get frustrated, they get angry, and they try and do it on their own, and often then they end up not being successful. Services, these non-academic support services, they're fragmented. They're siloed. I was wandering around campus getting lost trying to find the gym, and I noticed that you have sort of a one-stop shop, and there's a hall where all of the services seem to be clustered. However, there's still separate offices, and I wonder, and I don't mean to pick on you, and maybe you guys do it differently, but in general, my bet is that those doors don't open and have people talk amongst each other among the offices very often. Our services are fragmented. There's no reason to have an academic counselor versus a career counselor. Why can't they be together? Why do you have different tutoring centers, if you do, for writing versus math? It doesn't make a lot of sense from a student's perspective. And students get confused. More importantly, the evidence shows that this actually increases stratification in the community college. So the students who figure out where to go are the ones who are savvy and probably would have been okay anyway, frankly. The ones who really need it never figure out where to go. So we did a study a while ago and we talked to first semester students, and it was pretty clear that the ones who were hooked in, who had family members who'd gone to college, who were on campus all the time because they were full-time and so they knew people, they were the ones who found sort of those niche programs, the extra student support program or the support program for returning parents or whatever they are. But the people who really needed them, they had no way to find out about them. So what you end up doing is you sort of stratify within the community college. Your savvy people get help. The ones who need it are left behind yet again. We also assume when it comes to student supports that students just need to know the help is out there. They just need to know that there's that website and then they'll go get it. And that makes a couple of assumptions that aren't totally fair. I don't think of any college student, really, but particularly of students in the community college, where we're assuming that A, they know they need help, like I said. B, they're comfortable enough asking for it, which again, you'll recall I said many community college students find that terribly threatening. And C, they know which office to go to. Those are three assumptions that are unfair, again, for any college student, but particularly students who don't have the comfort or the background to know how to ask for help or where to do it. We also assume all students are the same, so everybody gets treated the same. The first time they come in, they have that 10-minute sit down with an advisor, whether they need it or not, whether they need a specialized advisor or not. We make assumptions about what students need that may not be based in the type of student who's entering our doors today, because that type of student is so incredibly diverse. And again, the result is just mass confusion and anger on the part of students. I've talked to a lot of angry students in my time. Here's the other thing. This is the one I really hate. Because all of these programs, so I'm talking about student success courses, learning communities, mentoring programs, these discrete little programs that you have filtered throughout the college and students come to somehow, this is the kind of thing that's actually been studied the most rigorously, because they're pretty easy to evaluate. So this is the kind of thing that's got the really good gold standard random assignment study that make researchers just salivate because we can talk about causality and stuff. Here's the problem. The gold standard evidence says they don't work. I don't care if you're talking about a learning community. I don't care if you're talking about a student success course, a mentoring program. They don't work if your definition of success is graduation. What we see is that these short-term interventions lead to short-term outcomes. So learning communities, for example, students who are in learning communities do better the semester they're in the program, and sometimes the next semester. Give them 3 to 4 semesters, the non-program students have caught right back up. The effects fade. Same goes for student success courses. Same goes for mentoring. It's kind of maddening when you want to find the answer and it's not there. But here's the thing. It doesn't make sense. We sort of have this inoculation model, I call it, right? So we assume if we just give you a shot of extra support as a freshman by putting you in a learning community or giving you a student success course, then you'll somehow be immune and vaccinated against all of the things that can come up later on down the line. Well, you don't know what those things are, right? And we don't know, it doesn't work. Vaccinations might work great for measles. They don't seem to be working very well for people and processes in an educational environment. What does work is intensive, intrusive, sustained, and somewhat expensive programs, okay? Programs that take students and touch them, intrude on their lives, make sure that they're being asked and offered help regularly for, we're talking a year or 2, they have remarkably strong outcomes. So we're seeing a program at the City University of New York, for example, called the ASAP program, where students are being put into this intensive cohorted program as freshmen. They're in cohorts of students. They have advising weekly or bi-weekly for the first year. They're in the program for 2 years. They get Mechur cards. They get crisis intervention. They get job help if they need it. And their graduation rates are like 20 to 30% higher than the average CUNY graduation rate. That's a huge bump that we don't see in social science research. And yes, it's an expensive program, but as the program director often says, it's not any more expensive than having those students leave and not come back. You're just front-loading the expense and you're getting students through. Expensive, yes, but also sustained, intrusive, and prolonged interventions. The rigorous evidence shows that it can work. You just need to have the institutional support and willpower. And speaking of institutional support and willpower and structures, I want to come to that third leg. Because we often think that, particularly for community college students who don't often spend a lot of time on campus, what matters most is in the classroom, and that's probably true. But the way the college is structured has a very big influence on how students do or do not make it to graduation. Colleges aren't really structured for student success right now, actually. First of all, we're still sort of talking about that old access model where funding is based on getting people in the door. So right there, you've got a bit of an issue around how do you get credit for getting people through. But also things like, how do you enroll everyone up front within the same 10-day period? Well, means that you do it quickly and you do a 10-minute guidance meeting when students really probably need a half an hour. Okay? Things like we, as those of us who love academia and love the intellectual process of learning, want to teach our passion. And we want to offer choice. We don't want to shut anyone out of choices. So we have this smorgasbord of classes, which is awesome. When I win the lottery, I'm going back to my alma mater and I'm smorgasbording. Like, I'm all in favor of the intellectual project. However, we see a lot of students in this country who attend community college for semester after semester. They come back, they earn credit, and that credit doesn't add up to anything because they're so busy sampling they never put together an actual program of study. Because nobody told them that of the 5 biology courses that they might want to take, only 3 of them actually meet the requirements for a degree. Too much choice is not a good thing. Behavioral economists have talked about this in all sorts of areas of life. They often use this argument around laundry detergent. Have you ever gone to the grocery store and stood there in front of the 25 different kinds of laundry detergent and been a little baffled? Like, you don't need that much choice. What was that? 27, there you go. I don't need 27. I need 1, maybe 2 or 3 in case I have sensitive skin, right? The same is true for community college students. They don't need that much choice. They might want it, and we might want to provide it, but actually it's counterproductive. There's been an argument made by some of my colleagues that what we need to do is increase the choice architecture of the college. That doesn't mean you get rid of all of the really fantastic niche classes that are fun and interesting and intellectual, but it means you say to students, here's your prefix menu. You think you want to be a biology major? This is what most students take. If you want to go and sample somewhere else a la carte, go ahead. But if you need a little guidance, if you follow this plan, you will get where you want to go in a timely manner. Just creating that kind of a structure can move students through so they don't keep coming back every semester but not earning a credential. Same with sequences. This really comes clear from Achieving the Dream in the developmental education sequence. Lots of places have like 3 courses of developmental education before you can ever get to a credit course. And from an instructor perspective, that makes a lot of sense. We can, really focus on the skills students need. We can make sure they have those skills. From a student's perspective, it's awful. Who wants to take 3 credits of non-credit coursework before you get to the good stuff? And what we see when we look at the data are that students who don't make it from developmental education into college credit courses often don't do it because they don't fail, they do it because they don't come back. Up to 25% of the leakage of those non-returning students between level A and level B in a sequence are non-returning because they passed the course but never re-enrolled. If you condense those courses and you structure them for students, and yes, it's harder to teach that way and it's a little scary, but if you think about it from a student perspective, making those courses shorter gives students less time to give up, it gives less time for life to get in the way, and it likely will move students through more quickly. I mentioned the silos before when I talked about non-academic supports. We love silos in the community college because everybody's an expert. And that makes sense from a division of labor perspective. But again, from a student perspective, it's probably not the best way to structure things. Why is adult basic education over there? Shouldn't it be a feeder into your programs? Right? Why are academic and career counseling not combined? From a student's perspective, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense from a division of labor perspective, but not if you're a student. Okay, I'm done with the depressing part. So I think hopefully what you've taken away from this is that we know a lot, and a lot of what we know is, and this frankly shouldn't be surprising when you listen to the statistics, that something's happening that's not quite working. I mean, if everything that was done at the community college worked, we wouldn't have the graduation statistics that I mentioned at the beginning. So, what do we take away from this? The message is not that everything you do is for naught. In fact, quite the opposite. Because when you think about what we know about what perhaps doesn't work well, we have lots of answers about what you can try to move that needle on student success. So let's go back to that classroom leg of the stool. If we know that students and faculty aren't talking to each other clearly, then let's start having that conversation. Why not make those expectations explicit? Sit down with your colleagues. I suspect that most instructors in higher education, and again, this goes for 4 years too, have never really sat down and articulated what that picture is in your head. When you say, I expect my students to act like college students, what do you really mean by that? I suspect most of you have never thought about it, and if you have, you certainly haven't shared your thoughts with your colleagues. If you can make those expectations explicit, then you can share them with your students. And I'm not saying you have to spend 3 lectures on it, but you certainly can embed that conversation into the work you do in your classroom. And you give your students the opportunity to live up to those expectations. They might still not, but then the onus is on them. But if you make those rules explicit, you're more likely to see students who rise to the occasion. Same with talking about failure. Same with talking about supporting students. There's a lot of evidence coming out right now from some studies funded by the Gates Foundation that show that instructors who work with their students around things like study skills in class And again, I'm not talking about entire lectures, but just embedding that work into the courses that you teach is a much more effective way to improve student success than farming it out to a student success course or a student success center. Take some time to teach your students how to use a syllabus. Take some time to talk about what you mean. We all have that sort of 2-hour rule. You know, you're supposed to study for 3 hours for every hour you're in class or whatever that rule is. What does that really mean? What does studying look like in your discipline? What does note-taking look like? Embedding those conversations in the classroom does a couple of things. Makes the expectations explicit. It also means that everybody gets the information. It's not incumbent upon students to seek it out anymore. It becomes intrusive and it becomes normal. So it's no longer threatening. It's assumed that students need this assistance, so students who would be too scared to ask might actually get it. So in the classroom, in addition to the pedagogical changes I mentioned, changing your approach to interpersonal interaction actually can perhaps have a meaningful difference on students who want to stick around, not just pass your course, but come back and take another class, hopefully with you. The other piece of this is talking across parts of the college, not just cross-disciplinary, but cross-function. So talk to the folks in the advising office. Explain to them what you expect a student in your program might do in terms of course-taking patterns. And at the same time, hear from them the frustrations students have. Hear from them the strategies that they might teach around course management or time management. Talk to each other. The silos have got to go away. When we talk about the broader institution, breaking down the silos is a start. Let's also talk about not making any more programs, please. I beg of you. I'm like so sick of studying programs that don't work. Let's change structures. So let's break down silos. Let's talk about how we can make sure that every student has an advisor with a name and a face, not just an advising office. Let's talk about how we can take the strategies that work in learning communities, like interdisciplinary conversations, and make that the norm. No more programs, please. And don't be afraid of mandatory. People don't like mandatory. Let's talk about mandatory. If it's true that students don't know how to ask for help, if it's true that they don't know where to go or find it terribly threatening, then it's time to start requiring that help. Why not require a student success course? Why not require that students meet with an advisor twice a semester instead of once, bracketing the whole staffing part of advising? Why not require certain things of our students? Again, it normalizes asking for help, and it normalizes the idea that everybody on a college campus is responsible for this type of support. It's not a break between teaching a discipline and supporting students. Everybody does all of it. The final thing I want to add is about students, because sometimes when we talk about how colleges can support students, we end up making it sound like students have no sense of responsibility or no part in this. And I don't mean to imply that. There is a lot that colleges need to do to improve outcomes, but that doesn't mean that there aren't things that students can't and shouldn't do as well. And so I don't want to remove that from the conversation. I find it a little awkward because I suspect that the students who are here today are the ones who have figured this all out. So I don't need to lecture you all on being, having agency and seeking out help and asking for it when you need it and taking advantage of the fact that you can construct a course schedule that works for you and your work life. I'm preaching to the choir right now. But I do want to point out that all of those things, teaching students how to be good consumers of assistance and support, teaching students that they do have some responsibilities. You may not like the culture of college, but you're here, so you do have a responsibility to be a part of that culture. That is okay too. Just because the institution has a lot that could be improved upon doesn't obviate the need for students to be involved in this as well. So I didn't want to make this sound like I was letting students off of the hook. But since those of you who are here are the ones who figured this out, I will leave that conversation for another time. To conclude, I've thought a lot about how colleges can support students, and And I get that I'm sort of in a position of privilege because I get to go out and talk to you all and then go back and write about it, and I don't have to actually implement it. And so that means that I get to say things that you can all roll your eyes and start telling me you don't have the money to do. But I do have this image in my head of what supporting students might look like in an ideal world if we could blow everything up and start over. And I encourage you to keep an eye on the City University of New York because they're actually starting a college from scratch as of next fall, where they tried to blow everything up and start over, and I can't wait to see what happens. So it is possible. But that image, and I want to leave you with it only because as you talk about this the rest of the day, I think there are pieces of it that you can start to implement even with budgetary constraints and a lack of time and all of the other things that impede real change. Supporting students needs to be sustained. It can't be a shot in the arm in August. It's got to be ongoing. And how you do that might vary, but I really do believe that at the end of the day, if we want a silver bullet, part of it is around making sure that every student who comes to your campus has the name of a knowledgeable staff or faculty member who can be their point person. So they know when they don't know what course to take next semester, they don't know how to get financial aid, they don't know who to ask for help, they just have this vague sense that they're drowning, they can go to this person. And that person may not have all the answers, but that person at least knows enough to get them the answers. Without a face and some sustained contact, I really do think students just get lost and give up and walk away. The second thing is this notion of being intrusive. If we take as our starting point that there are many students on the community college campus who either don't know that they need help, don't know how to ask for help, or find it really scary to ask for help, then we have to stop waiting for them to come to us. It's time to take it upon ourselves to teach them where that support is available. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do that for your 8th semester student, but certainly for students in their first couple semesters, you've got to be a little more intrusive. Shoot them an email. Pick up the phone. Make sure that they know someone is going to ask them if they're okay. And take them by the hand and teach them how to use the services you have available. The next thing is an integrated approach to supporting students. I mentioned this before. This academic support divide, it needs to go away. Everybody needs to support students across all pieces of their college life. And again, I'm preaching to the choir here. You're here. You probably get it. But when talking to your colleagues, it's really important to note you may be an expert on classical Byzantine history. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, you're still an instructor. And instructing students to graduation includes supporting them in whatever it is that they need. And finally, supports need to be personalized. The range of students who come to the open door of the community college is vast. We've got displaced workers, we've got returning veterans, we've got 18-year-olds, we've got students with developmental needs, we've got international students. You know this. So that means the approach has to be as personalized as the students coming into the door. Having a point person, I believe, this sustained and personalized approach with one person will help with that. And so I think if I had to say there's one change I would make, it would be that. But regardless of how you do it, make sure that it's personalized. Students need to know that their individual needs are met. And their needs are likely to change while they stay in the institution. And as those needs changed, the approach to supporting them needs to change as well. I am done lecturing at you since I started this talk by telling you that lecture doesn't work. I'm going to stop now. I believe there's time for question and discussion, and I don't know the best way to do that, but someone who knows more than me will probably figure it out. I thank you all. I thank you for the work that you do. I thank you for being here, and I thank you for listening. And good luck with all that you do.